Dear friends, welcome back to Data Analytics Talks. One of the important concepts to learn in DAX is the difference between calculated columns and measures. In this session, we will try to see the differences and understand when to use each of them appropriately. I would like to bring two problems that we can solve and understand this particular problem. The first problem is, as you are the data analyst of the global superstore, you need to calculate the gross margin percentage of your pizza outlet products. So you will ask me, do you have the data for that? Yes, I am going to provide you the data. This is a sample data. You can find the unit cost, quantity, and unit price. I hope you can arrive the gross margin percentage using these three data points. So in order to arrive gross margin percentage, you have to calculate sales amount, you have to calculate the total product cost, and you need to have the gross margin. Only then you can arrive gross margin percentage, right? We can have many approaches, but mainly we are discussing two approaches. One is based on the calculated columns and the other one is based on measures. So first solution is using calculated column. If you use a calculated column approach, you will have to have four calculated columns. One is for sales amount, then one for total product cost, another for gross margin, and finally one for gross margin percentage. So in order to arrive the sales amount, you need to multiply unit price with quantity. Example 9 multiplied by 6, 54. In order to arrive the total product cost, you need to have unit cost, then quantity. Example 11 multiplied by 3, you get 33. And in order to arrive the gross margin, you need to consider sales amount and total product cost. Sales amount minus total product cost, gross margin. Example 87 minus 33, you get 54. That is a gross margin. Then we are arriving the gross margin percentage from the gross margin. That's how you are arriving gross margin. Obviously, this approach is a little bit expensive because all these calculated columns are part of the model. They will also consume some RAM. So we will discuss the merits and demerits of calculated columns little later. Yes, solution 2, which is using measure, looks much simpler. You don't have any columns in the model. You are calculating sales amount, total product cost, gross margin, and even the gross margin percentage using DAX formula, and they are dynamic in nature. Okay, so we have a solution with calculated column and we have another solution using measure. So we can choose one of them and solve our first problem. We have a solution for our first problem. So what's the next problem that you were talking about? Yes, this is an interesting problem. We have been receiving a lot of complaints from our customers, and we would like to make an analysis of the complaints and identify which are the areas that is causing a lot of problems, which is impacting our feedback. So find the cumulative percentage of the complaints received for your pizza outlet, enabling the filter context. That's very important. Again, we have some data for that. Let's look into the two data points are given as the input. One is complaints and count of complaints. So in order to arrive the cumulative percentage, first activity is to calculate the cumulative total, then arrive the cumulative percentage. Then we can plot the visual accordingly. How do you do that? Can we do it using calculated column? If you can use calculated column, what are the demerits? What are the merits? Can we do it using measure? What are the merits and demerits? We will spend some time on that. Yes, we can solve our problem using both approaches. Either you can use the calculated column approach or measure approach. Both solution looks exactly same as you see on the screen. The first graph is derived out of calculated column approach and second graph is derived out of measure approach. If you evaluate, you have the top share for delayed delivery and the least share has inadequate topping quantity. Even though you look it fantastic, there is a problem here with this approach, with the calculated column approach. In our requirement, it was mentioned that our solution should consider the filter context. If you apply a slicer, the accumulation should recalculate. So let's see if that works fine for our solution. So before that, please note the delayed delivery has 31% and pizza note has 47% and incorrect billing accumulates to 61%. So incorrect billing accumulates to 61%. All three together accumulates to 61%. So if I remove the pizza not hot, this accumulation should change, right? It will not be anymore 61%. Okay, let's see that if that works or not. I would like to eliminate the pizza not hot option. Yeah, it is again recalculated, right? But what's the difference? Delayed delivery again constitute 31% in the calculated column approach. But here in the measure approach, it has become 37% and incorrect billing is at 61% in this calculated column approach solution, but it is 54%. See, now there is a recalculation happened for the measure approach, not for the calculated column approach. So it is obvious that if you use a calculated column approach for accumulation, your solution is not going to work. So choosing the right solution is a must. So now let's go and understand some of the theory behind this calculated column and measure approach. Okay, we will start with understanding calculated column. So if you are a student or learning Power BI, please note these points. So when you create a data model in Power BI desktop, you can extend a table by creating new columns. The content of the column is defined by a DAX expression evaluated row by row. Look at the default columns, like we had a unit cost, quantity and unit price. They were the data provided by our organization. Now, in order to arrive the gross margin, I had to create 3 calculated columns. And you can see that in the formula bar, there is a DAX formula. For example, for calculating the sales amount, there is a multiplication between the quantity and unit price. For calculating the total product cost, there is a multiplication between unit cost and quantity. And gross margin, there is a subtraction from sales amount to sales total cost. Then finally, we calculate the gross margin by dividing gross margin and sales amount and multiply by 100. There is a formula behind every calculated column. Calculated column is just like any other column in a table. You can use it in any part of the report. When you say that, of course, the measure is not like that. Okay, we will see that. You can also use a calculated column to define a relationship if needed. Basically, if you go to the relationship, you can see calculated column created in a table and that can be used to make relationship. But you don't see a measure here. That is very important to understand. The DAX expression is defined for a calculated column, operates in the context of the current row across the table. For example, this value only works across this row. It has nothing to do with other rows. Okay, that's a challenge. Okay. Any reference to a column returns the value of that column for that current row. You cannot directly access the value of other rows. That is the limitation of any calculated column. One important concept that you need to remember about calculated column is that they are computed during the database processing and then stored in the model. Yes, that is correct, and you have to remember that. See, that is of course when I made a filter, a slice, this visual did not recalculate, because as per the concept, as per the role, this calculated column is calculated and stored while data load. But that is not the case with measure. Remember that. That's one major difference here. Now, the behavior is helpful whenever you create very complex calculated columns. The time required to compute them is always process time and not the query time, resulting in a better user experience. So nevertheless, you should remember that every calculated column uses precious RAM. In order to create a gross margin, I have to create 3 other calculated columns, and each column consumes your precious RAM. Okay, so let's go back to see how measures work. Measure is another way of defining calculation in DAX model. So mainly measures are used to find aggregation. Whenever you do not want to compute values for each row, but rather you want to aggregate values for many rows in a table, measure is the way to go. And the same thing which we calculated using the gross margin using calculated columns can be achieved using a measure also, and we can make it dynamic and filter context sensitive. Yes, that is the exact impact in this graph where we use the measure approach. See, whenever I was excluding some of the categories, it was recalculating. When I am including some category, it is recalculating. Whereas the approach by calculated columns still remain the same because they were not filter context sensitive. Okay, so that's a major important difference between these two. So finally, the question is what to use, when to use. From these examples, you have understood when to use calculated column and when to use measures. But still, as a summary, let me put it here. Even if they look similar, there's a big difference between calculated columns and measures. The value of calculated column is computed during the data refresh and uses the current row context. It does not depend on user interaction on the report. A measure operation on aggregation of the data defined by the current context, which depends on the filter applied in the report, such as slicer, rows, column selection in a pivot table, or axis and filters applied to a chart. So calculated columns are row-level expressions evaluated during data load and refresh. They appear in columns in the data view and the model view. Use calculated column if you need each row of the data to have an independent value not impacted by filters, or if the calculation is too slow as a measure. But when to use measure? Measures are aggregation calculated during each visual interaction. They are responsive to the context of a specified filter. They do not appear in columns, only in the view. Use measures to summarize another field impacted by filters, such as ratios and percentages. Yes, before completing this session, I would like to share some tips so that you can complete this exercise. First of all, you need to create a table in Power BI. You can have any values for unit cost, quantity, and price. So it is simple. You go and create a new table and copy paste your data. Second one, you will have to right click on the data set and add a new column and create columns for sales amount, total product cost, gross margin, and gross margin percentage. So you can see these formulas and follow the steps. With that, we will be completing the option 1 with the calculated column approach. And for option 1 measure approach, you will have to create a new measure. You can give any name for the measure, then create a variable for sales amount, and which will use some X with the data table sales data, then sales data quantity multiplied by sales data unit price. Then another variable for total product cost, another variable for gross margin, and finally you will return gross margin percentage. So with that, you have completed the required DAGs for finding gross margin percentage, and you can drag a table and select the data set and add all required columns. With that, you will be able to complete your first task and go to second task. You will have to again create another table for complaints, and you can have any complaints, then you can manage any count as well. And you have to create 2 columns for cumulation, like cumulative count. For that, you can use a variable bar just to get the count, and you need to apply this formula so that it creates a accumulation based on the maximum values. And you can do a Pareto percentage by dividing cumulative count and sum of sheet count. And you can create a visual like this with the data available. Finally, you will have to create a measure which calculates the accumulation dynamically. With that, you will be completing both tasks. If you have any doubts, please make the comments. I will be able to support you. Thank you. With this session, you should be able to understand the calculated columns, measures, and the differentiate between measures and calculated column, and able to build a solution based on the given problems. Feel free to make comments if you have not understood everything. Thank you. Thank you for watching Data Analytics Talks.